Okay, so for today's lesson, we'll be working on how to make a keychain. So let me click out of this and let me add an image, right? So first, before we add an image, we want to make sure we have a specific tool. So we're going to go into edit first, and we're going to go to preferences. We're going to go add-ons. We're going to search up right here, image. Import, export, image, import, export, import images as planes. That's what we want. We're going to click on it. Yours will come unclicked. You just want to click on it, press save preferences, or you can press autosave too. Both works. Alright, so now what you should be able to do now is when you go to add, you can also add pressing Shift A. What you're able to do now is you're able to select certain things right here. Now I don't want any of these for the moment. I want to go to images right here and press image as plane. So now what I'm able to do is I'm able now to go into my Blender photos. I'm going to select an image, right? So now I'm going to go right onto my Z-axis view. This will give me a clear view of everything, and it's not going to be at an angle. That's the most important part when you're doing these things. When you're tracing or when you're doing any kind of work that involves straight, rigid lines, you don't want to mess up with that because that's going to be problematic later. There are fixes around it, and I'll show you a fix around it, but you don't want to do that because the fixes are okay, but they're noticeable. You'll get a base, but it's just not going to be very appealing. But there are fixes to it. Fast fixes if you are just in a rush. Anyway, I'm going to click End now to go to my sidebar right here. I'm going to go into a material view. This is right here is just object solid view. This is wire view, wireframe view. Right, and this one is rendered. Alright, so I'm just going to go in this view. This view will allow me to look at the picture, right? The picture wasn't there before, now it is. And now what I want is you want to set your units. Now my units are already preset, but what you want to do is you want to go into here and go into this cone sphere, scene properties right here. And you can go into here and make sure it's metric, unit scale 0.001, length is millimeters, right? So everything's gonna be in millimeters, right? The printer prints in millimeters. It's better for scale if your Blender file is in millimeters, just so you know a good frame of reference when you're deciding how large or small you want them to print out. And then scale right here, I want to go over here into viewport overlays, 0.001, okay? So now right here, this is around 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter, right? 1 millimeter squared. It's quite small. You're obviously not going to be able to print anything with that. So I'm going to go to scale. I can press scale right here. I can press S, or I can go over here and I can change the dimensions, although this is probably the slowest way to do it for the moment, for the specific scenario. But what I do is I'm just going to scale. And the thing I want to mention again about a plane is that it's 2D. You don't have to worry about any other dimensions. It's just 2 dimensions. You're just going to scale. What you see is what happens, right? If I have a 3 dimension, I'm going to just show you this quickly just so you get a good perspective. Right, so this is 3 dimensions. This is a cube, right? And if I move this over, right, now let's see what happens when I press scale. I just want to see this image get bigger like this, right? But what happens when I scale? The entire thing scales up, right? Well, I don't want that, right? I want it to be flat. I want it to be as flat as possible. So I can go over here and I can scale it like this, and okay, it's about the same size, but it's flat now, right? So that's what I mean when a plane, you don't have to worry about dimensions because there are only 2. This one has 3. You have to worry about the height, right? And what I will mention later is scaling. I'm just going to show you this now while I have the cube here. Scaling, right? On a plane, you can scale however you want. You know, you can just press scale and it'll scale. But when I press scale right here, okay, let's scale it, right? Okay, this is getting smaller, but what happens when we look to the side? It begins to look more like a wedge, right? More like a wedge, more like a pyramid, right? Depending on what shape it is. Okay, but that's enough for that one. Let's go into our image. Okay, so now what we want is to select a plane. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a plane. And now what you want is to maximize the space. I want to maximize as much space as possible in the image. Okay, that's perfect. That's about maxed out, right? Now I want to keep in mind, what are my layers? I want to look at the layers, right? So I know that my base layer, since there's a divide between the hair and the face, I don't have to worry so much about hair and the face because there is no need to divide because the mask serves as the division. It splits the image up into 2, so I don't have to worry about a hair layer or a face layer. I'll show you what I mean. This is, right, I don't have to worry about a layer right here because the mask divides it. But let's say if I don't have a mask. If we're looking at this looks really weird, right? There's no definition between the hair or the face. In that case, I would separate the hair and the face, right? I'd give the hair some extra layers, right? And how would I do that? Because you might be thinking the hair it's quite detailed, right? So which one do I do? Do I do the hair or do the head? It doesn't really matter. But I wouldn't do what I'm about to do right here, which is I'm gonna just build the whole entire template of the face and then build on top. I wouldn't do that. That'd be a waste of time. What I do is I do the hair separately, the face separately, right? You split it up, saves the time, saves the effort, right? So now what I'm gonna do, because there is no need for division between spaces, all I have to do is I need to create a mask, right, as a division, right? And then obviously I notice, okay, there's a mouth, so maybe I need to make it concave, right? I need to make a ditch on the mesh, right? And then the ears, I notice this one is up in the front, but oh, look, this one has a little division right here, right? So I make that ear smaller. I make the height of the ear smaller, so it shows some depth, right? It shows some layering, right? What do I mean by layering? Again, I mean this, right? There is a level of layering, right? And here, again, look, this ear right here is layered because it is less than the face, right? So now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna add some segments, right? I'm gonna do Control R. So Control R creates loop cuts, and my advice would be to leave it as minimal as possible. I wouldn't do one segment, like I wouldn't do this because that's just a pain. But I wouldn't do like this. That would be even more of a pain, right? I'd leave it like this. This is good. Three, so total 5 segments per 5 segments. That's pretty decent. I would do less or more, just depending on how detailed this is. This is relatively simple. I'm not making anything complex, so I wouldn't need more. I might need less, but I wouldn't need more. And because things curve, there are curves, I know I definitely might need a couple more points. The more curves you have, the more topology you have to add. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into vertex select. I'm going to select the vertexes. So right here. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drag them. I'm going to drag them to where they need to be. So what I'm going to do, oh, oops, I have my proportional editing. Let me turn that off. I'll show you what proportional editing does later. Right here, I'm going to drag the points. Drag the points to the corners. It's important to do it at the corners because the hairs, when you pull out the hair, I'll do one example right here. There's a dividing line right here. And when you're moving points, you can't cross lines. You know, it would overlap. And although you can do it, it's a nightmare to deal with. But two, it's very confusing. But two, it's not very appealing when you look at it. There are a bunch of overlaps, and it might cause errors in the print as well, which your printer might have to fix. Which is not a big deal, but I just wouldn't waste my time with that. So now what you want, I'll do a couple more hairs. I won't do the whole thing for sake of time, but I just want you guys to get the gist of everything. And notice I'm moving this point over, so I'm just going to drag this point over. But I just want to show you guys the gist of what I'm doing, which is just dragging the points to the corners. I want to go to the corners. I want to go to the parts that don't extend out of the main body, right? Those spikes on the hair extend out of the main body, right? Something like the chin does not extend out of the main body, right? Typically it does not. Right here, so I don't have to do any extrusion. I don't have to extrude the chin or anything because it's part of the main body. There are no extreme outliers, right? And even this ear is an extreme outlier. I could extrude it, that's perfectly fine. But I mean, there's no extreme outlier, so there's probably no need to do it. Although if you want to, that's perfectly fine. So now I mentioned extrude. This is what I mean. I select 2 points, or I select an edge, right? Whichever you prefer. Right, 2 points. And what I'm going to do is press E. Now I'm going to scale it. I'm going to press S for scaling. Right, I'm just going to scale it in more. Sometimes it doesn't scale all the way, so you just drag it. And I wouldn't just leave things to scale. I would move some points too, but this is a relatively triangular shaped spike, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. That's fine, right? It matches the lines quite well. But this one, you notice like these spikes, they start to curve a little bit more. Like I'll show you this one curves a bit more. So if I extrude out a point, which is E, right? And then now I'm going to drag the points. I'm going to drag the points. I can scale it first. It doesn't really matter. You can do either. It's just that one was way off. There was really no point in scaling it. But you notice that this line right here and this line, they're obviously not in sync, right? It's because this is a straight line, this is a curve. So to solve that, I'm going to add a couple of segments. Again, the more points you add, the more topology you get. I'm just going to do 3 for simplicity's sake, and I'm just going to move them to the curve. Right now it matches, it's a little bit more curved, right? And then now we're getting a pretty good view of this, a pretty good shape out of this. And I've just continue again and again and again with the spikes over and over again. Again, this is a relatively simple model, so it's pretty easy to do. But you can use any image as a reference. And the reason I chose keychains was because this is an easy and practical use of Blender, because all you do is to take a reference. There's no imagination, no extreme measurements involved either. You could use measurements too, like if I wanted to make like a bolt, or I wanted to make a specific tool or screw or whatever, I can get the measurements of that, right? And I can say, you know, let's say I want a ring. I want a ring, and you have, or I want a ring, or I want a loop, and I want a loop that has the total diameter from edge to edge of 20, let's say 20 millimeters. Well, we can do that, right? We can take a picture of that specific loop we want, and then we can take a picture of that, or we can screenshot it, upload it onto Blender, get out a measuring device on Blender. And a measuring device is basically, what I mean is, you can just get out like a cube and you can say, hey, I want 20 millimeters, right? I want 20 millimeters. Okay, this is 20 millimeters. This is how large the loop has to be, right? So it gives you a good frame of reference to work with. And what I did not mention, which I forgot to mention, was the scale. I mentioned the scale earlier. I did not do the scale, but let me do it now. The image right here is about 7 millimeters. If you look on a ruler, you look on any measuring device, 7 millimeters is quite small. You're not gonna be able to see much of it. So I'd scale it up. I scale it up to around maybe 40. That's what I typically use, 40, 45, even 50 for a keychain, right? And again, the thickness too is up to you. You can make the thickness as thick as you want. I'd stick around like half a centimeter, so that's like 5 millimeters, 4 or 5. You know, you don't want too cumbersome of a keychain, and you don't want too small of a keychain. So it's all about scale. And you'll notice it when you put into the splicer, which is the software you use to print things with, which we'll go over later, about scale. You can see on the platform that it's quite small or quite large, and you can scale it there too if you want. If you don't want to scale here, you can scale over there too. No harm in that. But now what I want to do is talk about a little bit about layering. So I'm going to make this invisible for a moment. I'm going to add another plane. Let me go to mesh, add a plane. So now I'm going to scale up this plane a little. Scale. Let's see the image, right? I'm going to just scale this down. Oops, let me scale down on the green, right? This would mean the Y. This green indicates Y, red indicates X, blue indicates Y, right? Just in case you don't know. Now I'm going to move it over, and then I'm going to rotate it slightly, right? And I'm using this key to rotate just because I don't want to go over here, press, and then swipe. That's a bit tiresome. It's right here, so why not use it, right? Now what I'm going to do is, I want to match this curve, right? How we can do that, we're going to do Control R again. So Control R, we're going to move the points. I'm going to move the points. I'm going to move the points. So that's what I could do. I can do that. Or again, I'm going to show you proportional editing right now. Proportional editing was this little circle right here. And there are different modes of proportional editing. This is smooth, so it's going to come out very curved, very smooth. You have spheres that come out very circular, semicircular. Rooted, again, as you would expect. The images indicate most things, right? And you can explore that on your own. What I want to do now is I want to pull, right? You notice a little magnifying glass showing up, right? That little magnifying glass is the loop on which the points, faces, or vertices are affected. So when I expand it, you're going to notice, okay, look, there are some points are following it, right? It's just not that one singular point anymore, right? And again, I'm using the scroller on my wheel to control the size of the loop. Right, so now I'd increase it. Okay, and that gets the curve pretty well, and there's some points that go outside, that's perfectly fine. I can turn off editing, the loop. I can turn off the proportional editing, and I can just drag the points, right? I'm going to drag the points to match the curve. I'm going to drag the points to match the curve. That's perfect, right? Okay, I'm not going to go any farther as far as dragging the points. You guys get the point, hopefully. What I will do is now remove this, and obviously this is nowhere near a perfect keychain, but what I want to talk about a little bit is, I mentioned earlier about viewing it from a specific axis. Viewing from a specific axis helps you keep everything in those dimensions. Even, I'm grabbing the blue point, which controls the X and the Y, and that's perfectly fine, but I can just press G, and I know I'm moving. And you can tell by the meter right up here that I'm moving within only the X and Y axis. There's no Z, because why? Because I'm looking from the Z axis. There is no leverage point for me to move on the Z axis. Right, so now what I want to talk about is extruding, right? Extruding and creating the layers. So now I'll create the layer of the face first, the layer of the head first. I'll move this up just so we get a clear view. I'll go into solid view just so it just looks a little bit better. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press tab. I'm going to press A, and I'm going to press extrude. Right, now depending how thick I want it, I can make it really thick, I can make it quite thin. It doesn't really matter. Well, it does matter, but it's just, in terms of structureness, by extruding it, you give it dimension, right? If you look at this, you notice this has dimension, this does not. You can't even tell that it's there because it's 2D, right? It's two-dimensional. It's on a 2D plane. It's not a 3D plane. You have no depth, right? But now that this is extruded, now you have 3 dimensions, right? And then this, let's see how much this is. 3 millimeters. I personally make it slightly thicker just for durability's sake. And you gotta look at the material, what you have, and what you're using it for, right? If you're just using it and you're just putting it on a stand, I mean, that's perfectly fine, right? You don't need it to be extremely thick. If it's just an image you're portraying, you don't need it to be extremely thick. But if you're putting it on like your bag, I mean, that bag is gonna face some form of external pressures, right? So you want to make it as durable as possible, and that requires a little bit of thickness. Again, I wouldn't make it too thick, it'd be cumbersome. It's a keychain. You're not making, something extremely needing of heavy duty. And then again, I'd do the same for this one. I'd extrude. Now again, you can extrude all the way, and then you can just, you can extrude all the way, and you can go like this. You can press it on the bottom, and then you can press extrude, and just do that. You can do that. That's perfectly fine. It doesn't really matter. But you can also just do this. Oops. You can just do this, right? You can just drag it up and layer it. And again, when you're doing this entire thing, I would keep the entire keychain as a whole within the realms of around 5 millimeters. I wouldn't make it more than that. So you really have to do a little bit of math on this, and not really that much math, but you just have to measure it. You say, okay, well, this is about 3 millimeters. Let me just change it to an exact 3. Well, what am I adding? What do I need? What kind of depth do I want? What kind of texture do I want on my keychain? Right, this is a texture kind of topology based keychain. So how many layers do I want? How many details do I want? And again, if you want to draw the face, you can draw the face. You can do the lines with the edges. It's just, it might be slightly more difficult, just depending on how thin the lines are, but to print out. But you can draw it. Same concept. It's the same concept. But what I want to do right here is I want to say, okay, this is 2.3. Okay, let's make this 2 just for simplicity's sake. Right? And I want to say, okay, well, I want about 3, but I'm not stingy about. I'm not crazy about the exact numbers, so that's fine. If this is like 2, then I do this. This may be like 1.25, 1.5 millimeters extruding from this point. So this is about about like what 4.25, 4.5, right? But now let's say on the model, there's on the image right here. Let me turn this invisible. Right, by the way, this eye icon right here makes things invisible. So you can turn them on or off. You can turn it off for the entire thing. So this is collection 1. You can add another collection as well. I'll just show you right now how to do that. You right click on it, and then you go to you go right down here and you just press new collection. Right, you just click anywhere and then you just click new collection right here in this little scene collection. Right, but the point I was saying is you could just turn this entire thing off and make it invisible if you want. Just be aware if you are, constructing something and you have different parts, make sure you delete it when you're printing it out, because it's just gonna, they're just gonna stay there. They're invisible. It doesn't mean they're not there. You just can't see them, right? And it's gonna come out when you export them. But now what I wanted to show was make this invisible. Go into mode, right? These little spikes on the hair, right? These little lines, right? Where do I want those to stand? Do I want those lines taller than the mask or not as tall as the mask, right? And probably the best choice would be not as tall as the mask. You can make them taller, but it's close to the hair, so I'd say not as tall, right? Right, so you just have to measure things out and measure what is the maximum height do I want, and how will I space it? How will the spaces, the heights between certain faces, how would they affect the definition of the figure, right? I don't want it so much so much definition that it just looks awkward, but I don't want so little definition that you can't see it, right? So you want to just focus on that. Right, and then last thing to do is the loop for the keychain, right? In the loop for the keychain, you can add anywhere on the keychain. You can add to the top right here. You can add to the bottom. You can add to the side. It doesn't matter. You can add anywhere you want. But I'm just going to delete this right now, and I'm going to get the loop. Right here is cylinders. You can add a cylinder. Right here I have a cylinder. And right here is it would come out like this. Before you press anything on the screen, if you want to edit your cylinder any specific way regarding the faces or anything, you press add cylinder, this little icon down here, and then right here you see vertices. I already pre-adjusted it, but again, originally it's going to be 32. It's going to be 32, and you're going to say, well, 32 looks nice, but I want more topology. So you just add more segments until you're satisfied. I'd recommend around 100. Right now it's 140. That's perfectly fine. The other radius and depth. Radius is just how wide it is. Depth is how tall it is. You can adjust it outside. The most important thing is the faces, the vertices. Right now it's a lot smoother. Right now what I want is I want to make it more like a loop. Right. And again, a little bit of measurement, a little bit of math that you have to do. If you're attaching this to a hook, you want to measure. Okay, well there's that little piece of metal loop that you attach the keychain to, right? Well, how much can that expand, right? How much can that expand? If that can expand very little, I'd make the loop quite thin. I wouldn't make it too thick, but at the same time, you gotta think, how durable do I want the loop? This is a keychain, right? This isn't some trophy I'm putting on a wall. This is a keychain that will be, abused by the environment. So I want it to be as durable as it can possibly be, while being as streamlined and as decent looking as possible. So I'm gonna make this quite thin, and because the size is small, obviously I probably have the size around 5 millimeters. If it was a 50 millimeter keychain or 40 millimeter keychain, I'd keep it. I keep it around 5. That's just for the hole alone on the inside. You can determine these values yourself as well. But I'm gonna go into face select. I'm gonna delete the faces. Oops, not dissolve face. I'm gonna delete the face. I'm gonna delete top and bottom. So now we're just left with a ring. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a modifier. This modifier is the wrench right here. Modifiers are just additions you can add to your mesh to give it some form, right? And it just depends, right? You have modifiers for animation. You have modifiers for modeling, right? These are typically modifiers for modeling. Some of these are also modifiers for modeling. Armatures are also modifiers for modeling. They're also for animation, right? Some typical ones you might use, I'll show you, is solidify, subdivision surface, multi-resolution, mirror, you might use mirror, array, curve, and that's typically it. And we'll go into more detail about those later. Typically when we're doing editing in the form of edit mode, we're going to use subdivision. We're not going to use multi-resolution. That's for sculpting, which we will go into later. Let me go into edit mode, tab, and let me add solidify. I did not add solidify yet. Okay, solidify. Now you can see again, this adds dimension, right? Before it's 2D, right? Because we took away the faces, now it's 2D. It's like paper. There is no true depth to it, right? So now I want to give some depth. So I'm gonna solidify. And now I define the inside as being 5 millimeters. So I want the inside to be 5 millimeters. So that means I'm gonna affect the outside, right? If I want to say the maximum diameter of the ring from outside to outside is going to be 5 millimeters, then I'll just move it inside, right? Understanding that this circle right here, this hole right here, is going to be less than 5 millimeters, right? And we can measure how big it is using, a measuring device. You can just add a cube, set it to 5, see if it fits. If it doesn't, then okay, maybe it's smaller or bigger, right? But it just depends what you define. Right now, I've defined it to be the external diameter is 5. Right, but I want the internal, right? I want the internal, so now the internal is 5. It's like way too thin, so I'd make this. If I'm looking at a meter right now, I'm looking at a measuring device, I'd say 3. 3 is quite cumbersome. 2.5 seems about decent. But again, you define it. You look at a ruler. You look at a measuring device, and you say, how durable do I want it? How detailed do I want it? How large? How small do I want something? Again, that's why we do it in millimeters, so we understand the scale of what we're looking at. Right? Understand that that's in actuality approximately the size that's going to come out. Okay, but as far as everything else, that's all I wanted to show you today. Thank you for watching.